When we look at relationship between countries at different levels of development, we first look at international or foreign aid. International foreign aid is the giving of money and or goods by one country which is particularly well off to another, or by an organization to another country. Now let's look at some of the forms of these aid that take place. When you look at some of the various types of aids that take place, we have the economic aid, which is simply intended to support the economies of recipient countries, and generally this aid is provided by one country to another, and the purpose can be, for example, to support the economy in terms of financially. For example, let's say if Pakistan is in trouble, whenever it comes to foreign reserves being too low, they can ask for loans or grants or even credits, which is sometimes also can be given for a particular task. Let's say, for example, USAID may give some money for a particular task, like for example educational sort of development and so on and so forth. The bilateral aid is basically a form of economic aid where uh, a single country gives aid to another. So this is basically one to one kind of sort of aid. Economic aid can be not one to one, it could be one to many, but bilateral is one to one kind of a thing. Sometimes the aid can be multilateral, which means that there is an organization like World Bank or UN that is kind of like receiving money from different countries and then are giving sort of aid to a particular country. Like, for example, recently during the floods, the UN helped Pakistan in terms of flood crisis, and that aid was a multilateral aid, which where different countries were contributing towards that pool, which was then given to UN, which then gave this or disperse that money to Pakistan so that they can improve sort of situation in the flood areas or in the areas where there are flood victims. Then comes humanitarian aid, which is where aid is given for a reason, like for example helping the poor of the country or helping the situation. For example, if there's a natural disaster like floods, then emergency supplies like first aid, water, food and clothing can be given to a country in need, and this can be given by the NGOs, the non-governmental organization, but it could also be given by another country in the form of direct aid. Lastly, we have what we call military aid. This is aid given to strengthen the security of a country, and this aid may be in the form of weapons, training of military personnel, or the provision of military personnel to work with the country's own forces. We saw in Pakistan's case, Pakistan was provided a lot of military aid by the US to fight in areas where the US was trying to control terrorism and so on. Now, let's look at some of the reasons of giving aid. Countries may provide aid for a variety of reasons. The first reason is to promote economic development, and that sometimes happens through international organizations like IMF or World Bank. And the reason is that the stronger the economic development in an area, the stronger will be the social and other aspects of that country, and that can help the whole world when a country is helped to become more economically developed. Similar to this is the idea that we want to sort of help another country to help in the reduction of poverty. Sometimes countries are suffering from absolute poverty, and as a result of that, people may be uh, dying, or there could be issues when it comes to income distribution to be very unfair, and therefore, helping another country in the reduction of poverty can be good in terms of solving the economic issues of that country. Thirdly, we may want to also sometimes promote a country's exports by requiring the recipient country to use the aid to purchase the donor country's products. So, in a way, we are trying to give aid in the form of money to buy the exports of the country, and this may help the country that's giving the aid to improve its exports and therefore GDP, and therefore kickstart the economy sometimes. Aid can also be given to another country to help in preventing the destruction of the environment. If a country is going through massive sort of environmental degradation, then maybe aid can be provided by other countries to improve the environmental condition of that country. Similarly, in the situation where we want to improve the security by preventing friendly governments from falling under the influence of unfriendly ones, we can also provide aid. For example, in the case of Pakistan, US aid was given in order to counter terrorism in Afghanistan and other regions, and that aid was primarily was also used to form military bases, and as a result of that, the goal has been to improve the security for the US by making sure that the terrorism is curtailed in these regions. Let's look at some of the effects of it. There is no agreement on whether international aid is good or bad, but there could be both positives and negatives of international trade. So let's look into the pros and cons of international trade. Positive of international trade is that it is promoting economic growth, especially in countries with good governance. It is also reducing poverty through the provision of jobs and sometimes direct actions like giving clean water and so on. And it is often most effective when directed at areas such as enhancing education, building rural or urban infrastructure, protecting private property, and so on. So it is providing that funds which can help in a country to get economic development to happen. But the negatives are also that we can end up having a country to increase aid dependency, which means rely on aid, harming basically domestic producers and support poor economic management because a country may become completely reliant on international trade. This can be because aid donors sometimes fail to coordinate activities or because of corruption. In the case of Pakistan, for example, there were times when aid was not properly utilized because of one reason or the other. Secondly, sometimes aid tied to buying from the donor may lead to purchase of poor quality or higher price products. If, for example, a country is giving you aid in terms of those money tied to you buying the goods, for example, let's say China sometimes give aid to other countries where China may ask to, for example, also purchase all the inputs and labor and other services from China. Then this may mean that if the quality is good, then that aid will be of good benefit. But if it is not, it could be a problem. Lastly, we look at government approach. In some countries, aid has generally benefited the ruling elites or the rich, so that instead of creating prosperity and economic development for everyone, it has reduced the living standards of most of the inhabitants of the country because it's directed towards only the rich and not the poor. So we can argue this that the problems with international trade is whenever international trade is tied to political reasons, it may not be desirable because sometimes it can lead to a country giving up its own independence or sovereignty because you start relying on another country, and that another country can push for policies which could be problematic. Lastly, let's understand the importance of aid. When you look at humanitarian aid that helps in crisis, it can provide quick and large scale help in times of, for example, natural disasters like floods in Pakistan, till the country can take over the disaster relief effort. So you can provide quick support, and it can also be helpful when it comes to improving health. For example, there is a lot of help provided by many organizations to eradicate polio in Pakistan, and that is great because it can help in eliminating diseases in developing countries, and can help in them in terms of getting clean water, hygiene, education, and other basic sanitation, which can improve health indicators of the country. Then there could be provision of infrastructure, which is providing roads and bridges, and also systems and electricity, schools and health that can help in a country to become uh, more self-sustainable. It can also be argued that when you are giving a country, for example, money for economic growth and development, like for example, increasing industry, by giving them basic help in terms of equipment or technology, you can also allow them to become better, and new investors can come later on, and it can also help them in becoming self-sustainable in the future, and may able to increase their domestic production as well as exports. Then comes poverty relief. In 2019, just under 600 million people were in extreme poverty, and by 2030, this number is expected to fall to some 436 million. And many of the poor live in these rural areas where they do not have access to proper medical treatment and education. And so, when we provide these kind of services to the poor, we can expect the extreme poverty to go down. Lastly, world security is another important reason why aid should be given, because aid reduces the threat of terrorism by reducing poverty in some countries and can help in strengthening good governance and transparency and in the economy. A good example of this is Afghanistan, where a lot of US aid was given to provide good governance and also to reduce the terrorism in the country.